Okay, June 8th, Yud Tet Sivan. We are beginning Siman Kuf Mem Aleph. It is Daf Chaf Gimel Amud Bet. Dirshu Daf Yomi Behalacha. The Amud today is Daf Chaf Gimel Amud Bet. Tzarich Likrot Me'umad. The Kriyat Torah has to be done standing. Va'afilu lismoch atzmo lakotel o la'amud asur. Even to lean on a wall or to lean on a pillar is forbidden. Ella imken, unless, ella imken hu ba'al basar. Ella imken, unless a person is a heavy-set individual. Haga. Vechena hazana kore tzarich la'amod ima kore. The Baal Koreh has to be standing. The person, the Oleh, has to be standing. Whoever is reading the Torah has to be standing when they're reading the Torah. So if you have a Baal Koreh, the Baal Koreh has to be standing, and the Oleh la Torah, the one who's been called up, has to be standing. If the Oleh is the one who's reading the Torah, he's reading his Aliyah, the one who's been called up to the Torah, he also has to be standing. In any case, they have to be standing. Tzarich likrot me'umad hakriya shekorin betzibur. The kriyat Torah that's done for the tzibur, for the kahal. That kriya, the koreh Torah, has to be standing, and the oleh has to be standing. V'yalfinan ze midichti ve'ata po amod imadi. Hakadosh Baruch Hu was reading the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu, and he said ve'ata po amod imadi. Mashma afilu Hashem yitbarach hamakre leMoshe haya omed kivyachol. We learn from this pasuk that even Hakadosh Baruch Hu, who was reading the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu, so to speak, he was standing. We see from here that the person who's reading from the Torah has to be standing. V'im ken kol sheken shekol Yisrael hayu omdin mipnei emat Hakadosh Baruch Hu hanoten ota. And all the more so that all of Am Yisrael was standing out of fear when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was giving the Torah. V'amrinan od keshem shenitena be'ema. The same way was given with fear, with trepidation. Kach anu tzrichim linhog ba be'ema. Umikol makom b'di'avad shekera'a meyushav yatsa v'en tzarich lahazov alichod. So too, how should we conduct ourselves during the Kriyat Torah? We should conduct ourselves be'ema. Umikol makom, however, bedi avad, if the koreh Torah read the Sefer Torah sitting, bedi avad shekera'a meyushav yatsa ve'en tzarich lahazov v'likrot. If the Kriyat Torah was done sitting, you don't have to go back and read it again. Va'afilu lismoch atzmo, hainu, afilu smicha ketzad. Even if a person is only slightly leaning, let's say a person is leaning in a way that if you remove what he's leaning on, he won't fall. He'll still be fine. He's only leaning slightly. Gam ken asur. That is also forbidden. Tzarich la'amod be'ema. A person has to be standing, but standing in a state of trepidation, of fear. Therefore, even if he's only slightly leaning, that is not called amida be'ema. O la'amud, or if a person is leaning on a pillar, hu shulchan hakri'a ukai gamna. Oh, excuse me, o la'amud, this is the table from where we read the Sefer Torah from, or anything similar. If a person is not allowed to lean on anything during the Kriyat Torah, when the Baal Koreh is not allowed to lean, and the Oleh is not allowed to lean during the Kriyat Torah. Ella imken hu ba'al basar, unless he's a heavy-set individual. Vehu hadin holeh o zaken, somebody who is ill or an elderly individual. Vehu hadin holeh o zaken harbe shekashe lo amida bli smicha. It is difficult for him to stand without leaning. Ach yizaher sheismoch ketzat. Ach, however, he should only lean slightly, a little bit. Velo yismoch kol kach ad sheminatel oto davar yipol. Even though we're saying that in the case of a heavy-set individual, in the case of an ill person, in the case of an elderly person, they are allowed to lean, but they should only lean slightly. They should lean in a way that if we remove the object that they're leaning on, they'll still be fine. They won't fall over. ואם אי אפשר לו לסמוך כי אם בעניין זה, והוא צריך סעד לתומכו, מותר גם בזה. But if he really has no other choice, that he has to completely lean on an object, then it's mutad. אך לא יישן על המפה של השולחן. A person should be careful if they need to lean, not to lean on the tablecloth that's on the table we are reading the Sefer Torah. שתשמיש קדושהו אלא על השולחן עצמו. The mapa, what's covering the table where the Sefer Torah is on, it has a din, it has a status of tashmish kedusha. Therefore, a person has to be careful not to lean on it. Rather, a person should lean on the table itself. V'chen hachazan hakoreh. So too, the chazan who is reading, not only if you have an oleh who's reading his aliyah, but the Baal Koreh has to be standing, and once again the Oleh who's standing up there for his aliyah has to be standing. Vehu hadina segan sheomed etel sefer Torah. Od katav sham pe'amim she'sefer Torah aruka ugedola harbe. Sometimes the sefer Torah is very large. It's very big. It's narrow. It's large and narrow. Ve'akoreh shetzarich likrot mitoch haketav, and the Baal Koreh that needs to read from the kitab, from the actual writing, he's not allowed to read by heart. He has to make sure he's reading it. He's actually reading it from the Sefer Torah. And so too the oleh, the person who's been called up, he needs to be able to see into the Sefer Torah what the Baal Koreh is reading, and read quietly together with him. ואי אפשר להם לראות בראש הדף אם לא כששולחים עצמם סמוך לספר תורה. And they're not able to see what's at the top of the Sefer Torah, what's all the way in the top line, unless they incline themselves, they bend over. And what's going to happen? You're going to have them leaning on the table. Yesh lehatir. This is permissible. This leaning is not derech ga'ava. They're not leaning out of arrogance or out of haughtiness. When do we say that leaning is a problem? When a person is standing tall and he's leaning. Someone who is bent over and inclined. That is called standing with trepidation. Amida be'emah. If somebody, as it is, he's inclined and he's bent over, it's clear he's standing out of trepidation. That is, then in that case, it's okay to lean. ביד העשוי מכסף להורות לפני הקורא באיזה שורה ותיבה שהוא עומד עתה. And so too, they used to have the one person who's presiding over the Kriyat Torah, that he's holding the silver pointer to show the Baal Koreh where to read. עתה פעמים אי אפשר לו כי אם כששוחה עצמו וסומך על השולחן. Sometimes he doesn't have a choice but to bend over and to lean in order to show the Baal Koreh from where to read from. Mutar. אך ייזהר שאחר שיקרא השורות העליונות מראש העמוד ויגיע בחצי העמוד או קרוב לו, שאפשר לו לראות היטב בלי סמיכה, יסקוף משחייתו כדי שלא יצטרך להיות סמוך כלל עד כאן דבריו. However, once a person is no longer at those top lines, once again, we're talking about a large, narrow Sefer Torah, where the Baal Koreh literally has to lean over in order to see the top lines. In that case, it's mutar, because it's clear that he's not leaning out of arrogance. Leaning out of arrogance is where a person is standing up straight, and he's leaning against something. But if someone is bent over, if someone is inclined and bent over, where it's clear that they're standing, that they're leaning, that the Amidah is be'ema, that they're standing there out of trepidation, that's mutar. So too here, by the Baal Koreh, if he's leaning in, he has no choice but to lean in order to read the top lines, that is mutar. He just has to be careful. As he works his way down the kriyah, that he no longer really needs to lean, to make sure that he stops leaning and stands properly. Bet. Lo yikre'u shnayim, ella, two people should not read together at the same time. Ella ha'oleh koreh v'shaliach shotek. Either the person who got the aliyah, who's been called up, he reads, and the Shaliach Tzibur, the Baal Koreh, is quiet. Or Shaliach Tzibur Koreh, or the Baal Koreh is the one who reads. Ve'ha'oleh lo yikra bekol ram. And the Oleh, the one who got the Aliyah, may not read simultaneously in a loud voice. Meaning the Oleh has a responsibility to read. If he doesn't read, we're not talking about the Baal Koreh now, we're talking about the Oleh who got the Aliyah, he has to read, or else it's a bracha levatala, according to many Rishonim and Maran HaShulchan Aruch. So he has to read, but he has to be careful not to read in an audible voice. He can read at the same time as the Baal Koreh, but not in an audible voice. If you have two people who are reading at the same time in a loud voice, that we can't decipher, it's not clear, we can't make out what's being said. The Oleh Torah, he reads together with the Baal Koreh, however, he must read in a quiet voice that is not audible. Lo yikreu shnaim. Detre Mishnah Bura explains Detre Kale La Mishtam'e. Two voices cannot be heard simultaneously. When we hear two voices simultaneously, we cannot make out the words that are being said. V'shaliach tzibur shotek mihu im ha'oleh to'eh banekudot o bate'amim mesayeo belahash. If you have the Baal Koreh up there and he's quiet and it's the Oleh who's reading, if the Oleh makes a mistake and he needs to be corrected, then the Baal Koreh may help him out quietly. O Shaliach Tzibur Koreh. Uchminhagenu akshav shele'olam Shaliach Tzibur Koreh afilu kesheha'olehu baki. And our minhag today is that the Shaliach Tzibur reads the Torah. We have a Baal Koreh reads the Torah. Afilu kesheha'olehu baki. Even if the one receiving the Aliyah is proficient in the reading. Why is it that the Baal Koreh reads regardless whether the Oleh is proficient or not? Because we don't want to embarrass somebody who gets an Aliyah and he doesn't know how to read. וגם ימצאו הרבה שאין יודעים בטוב לקרוא הנקודות והטעמים וירצו לקרוא והציבור אין יוצאים בקריאתן. Or, what's another reason that only the Baal Koreh reads? That maybe you'll have somebody who thinks he can read, but he doesn't read. He doesn't get the vowels correctly, doesn't get the cantillation marks correctly, doesn't get the notes correctly. So he thinks he can read. If we let him read, the tzibur is not going to be yotzeh. They're not going to fulfill their obligation of Kriyat Torah. Therefore, regardless of how proficient a person is, whether they are proficient or not proficient, the minhag is it's the Baal Koreh who reads the Torah. If the reason that we only allow the Baal Koreh to read is because sometimes we have people who want to read, but they're not good at their reading, they're not good, they miss out on the vowels and they miss out on the cantillation marks. And if we don't let them read, if we don't let them read, then there's going to be an argument, there's going to be a fight. Therefore, we make a general rule that only the Baal Koreh can read and nobody else can read. And that way, nobody should get insulted, or nobody should have, or nobody should think that they have a right to read when they get an aliyah, especially those people who think they can read, but unfortunately, they really cannot read. Or they are not proficient. They think they're proficient to read, but they are really not proficient to read. Therefore, we just have a Baal Koreh. Likrot im shaliach tzibur, hainu mitoch haketav. The Oleh reads together with the Shaliach Tzibur, with the Baal Koreh, from the Ketav, from the writing. Levatala, delo mistaber sheyivarech ha'oleh al kriyat ha'shaliach tzibur. Why does the Oleh read? Because he made the bracha. What bracha is he making on? He's making a bracha on the kriya. On whose kriya? On his kriya. Not on the kriya of the Shaliach Tzibur of the Baal Koreh. Therefore, he reads together with the Baal Koreh. However, he does so in a very quiet, inaudible voice. Benahat. Why does the Oleh read quietly? Two voices simultaneously reading, we cannot make out the words. Lo shayche ki im bekore bekol ram. The only time we say that two voices reading simultaneously, we cannot make out the words, that's when they're both reading out loud. But if one person is reading out loud and one person is reading in an inaudible voice, even though it's simultaneously, we'll still be able to make out what the Baal Koreh is saying, because one is reading in a loud voice, we'll be able to make out what he's saying, and the other person is reading in an inaudible voice, so it doesn't disturb the reading, or it doesn't disturb the tzibur, the kahal, from being able to make out what the words are that they're hearing. Shelo yashmiya le'oznav, ayin bevet Yosef shehuva sa'ad laze misefer hazohar. The Zohar, the Bet Yosef brings the proof from the Zohar, proving that the Oleh reads in a quiet voice, it should be inaudible, that he himself cannot hear it. It doesn't even reach his own ears. Va'afilu mashmiya, Yud Gimel Mishnah Brura, va'afilu mashmiya rotze lomar, af de yoter tov shelo le'ashmiya le'oznav, even though it is better that it's inaudible, that the Oleh cannot hear the Kriyat Torah, mikol makom imashmiya gamken leka lemehash. What if he reads it in an audible voice, or at the very least he can hear himself? We just finished saying that the Baal Koreh reads it out loud. The Oleh la Torah reads it together with the Baal Koreh, but he reads it in an inaudible voice. What if he reads it, but he can hear himself? Mikol makom imashmiya gamken leka lemehash delo adif mitefila shetiknu gamken belahash vafilu haki mashmiya leaznav. It is not more stringent than the Amidah that they instituted, that you read it quietly, quietly. Vafilu haki mashmiya leoznav. By the Amidah, you can read it to the point that you yourself can hear it. Therefore here, even though by the Kriyat Torah you're not supposed to read it in an audible voice that you yourself can hear it, however, if you do, it's not any more stringent than the Amidah, and of course it's not an issue. Just going to read. We just did the Mishnah Brura. I'm just going to read. I realized I didn't read the Shulchan Aruch inside. Lo yikreu shnayim. Two people should not read simultaneously the Kriyat Torah. Ela haoleh koreh v'shaliach tzibur shotek, or shaliach tzibur koreh v'haoleh lo yikra b'kol ram. Either the koreh, the Baal Koreh, either the one who's been called up, he reads and the Baal Koreh is quiet, or the Baal Koreh reads and the person who's been called up, he doesn't lo yikra b'kol ram, he doesn't read in a loud voice. He still reads, he has a chiyuv to read, but he doesn't read in an audible voice. Mikol makom tzarichu likrot im hashaliach tzibur kedei shelo teh birchato levatala. However, in all cases, not to get confused, that the Oleh, the person who gets an Aliyah la Torah, of course he has to read. He just has to read in a quiet voice. In order that his bracha should not be levatala, he has to read in order that his bracha should not be levatala, just he cannot read in an audible voice. Ela shetzarich liklot benachat shelo yashmiya le'oznav. He has to read quietly, that it's not even heard to his ears. Vafilu mashmiya le'oznav, the Rama writes, leka lemehash. And if he happens to read in an audible tone, in an audible voice that he himself can hear, there's nothing to worry about. Delo adif mitefila kedil el siman kuf aleph. It's not more stringent than the Amidah. The same way at the Amidah, if you read it you're allowed to read in an audible voice that's heard to your ears. So too here, even though we read in a voice that's not heard to our ears, if a person does end up reading it in a voice that's audible to his ears, like a lemehash, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing to worry about. Gimel, v'yesh noagim lehamid mi shemakre la'oleh mila b'mila v'achar shegomer hamakre hamila omra ha'oleh. There used to be a minhag that they would have a person standing by the Sefer Torah, that he would read word for word, and then the Oleh, the person who got the Aliyah, after the person who's reading word for word, after he would finish reading a word, he would repeat it after him. ואחר שגומר רוצה לומר דכיוון שאין אומרים שניהם בבת אחת, לקה למחש Leka hashash tetre kale lo mishtam. Over here, the Mishnah Berurah explains what's Maran HaShulchan Aruch teaching us. Over here, you don't have two voices saying it simultaneously. You have one person. The minhag that this v'yesh nohagim that Maran HaShulchan Aruch is talking about is that you have a person reading out a few words at a time or word for word, then the person repeats after him, the oleh repeats after him. In that case, there is no issue. That's not considered like two people reading it simultaneously that we can't make out the words. Okay, Bezrat Hashem, we will continue in Seif Daled.